Hi everyone, my name is Tori, this is Novel Life, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really fun video that I actually saw my friend Cheyenne from That's How Book Girl do, and I thought this would be a really fun video to do, and that is talking about books that I love that I just never talk about. And it's for like different reasons. I'm pretty sure I've talked about these books on my channel at one point in time, but I like to take out oldies but goldies, you know what I mean, and just throw them on my channel in a video like this. So even though they might be a little bit older books, I still think people should read them. So these are just, I guess, random romance recs as well. I don't know. I just wanted to do this video and I thought it was really cool. So let's just go ahead and dive in. The first one is not going to come as a surprise if you know me, and that is Always by Bethany Chris. I've been a huge fan of Bethany Chris since 2015, I think. I was just in love with her writing, and I love the way she told a story. Now, she writes a lot of mafia romances, so it starts with one family in New York, one family in Chicago, one family in Canada, and then she's written all their kids. And so this is this first book with their kids. Now, this follows Cross and Catherine, and the reason why I love this book, and I think I just never talked about it, because it's a trilogy. A lot of people don't particularly like trilogies that follow the same couple. I don't necessarily mind it if the story warrants it, but Cross and Catherine, they go through it in their trilogy. This is one of the most emotional trilogies I've ever read, only because there's a lot of mental health representation in this book, so there's a lot of trigger warnings. Catherine goes through a lot. She is one of those characters that she has everything that she could ever want. Her family is extremely rich. She could do anything that she wants, and she still is struggling because of something that happened in her past, and she's never really talked about it. And Cross is there as just the person that holds her up during that time, and it becomes more of a codependent relationship, and he recognizes that. At some point in this trilogy, there comes a time where he has to let her go, and she has to figure out things on her own, and that really throws her for a loop. And it just, she has to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. That doesn't mean Cross doesn't love her, but that just means that, she has to stand on her own, and he will come back into her life once she does that, and that's harder. Then it's harder for her to let him in after doing that than she thought. So it was just a beautiful trilogy that I just had the best time. I've reread it a couple times now, and I haven't read it in a while just because it is so heavy. I mean, this book is big, but the font is very tiny. It's a 400-page book. Yeah, 300-something page book, and the font is very, very tiny. But this is the first book in the trilogy, and a book I would highly recommend to anyone if you want that very in-depth, very heavy and emotional, and I wouldn't say toxic. I mean, it's toxic because of the circumstances, but it is still a really good book, and trilogy that I absolutely love. So highly recommend that one. Now, the next one is Fixed on You by Laurelyn Page. So this is one I have talked about quite a bit. I'm not going to lie. I absolutely love the original covers, which this is. She is doing a Kickstarter with foiling and beautiful, beautiful covers. And I can't spend that much money on these books, but I love these books because I think this is a book I read back in 2013, 2014, because I was reading them as they, by the second book, I was reading them as they came out, and I was just emotionally attached to this couple. So this whole, I think it's a 4-book series. The 5th book is from his point of view, so it's not necessarily a continuation, but it follows the same couple. I don't know what it is. Sometimes I get so attached to couples that have multiple books, but I feel back in the 2015, 2016 era and before with romances, there was a lot of series that follow the same couples, and that's just what everyone loved. And now everyone just loves a standalone romance. You know what I mean? Which, don't get me wrong, I do love that. But I got emotionally connected with these characters because, once again, the mental health representation in this book really, really spoke to me at a time where I really didn't know all too much, my own personal journey with my mental health. So it was a really, really good time. It's very, how would I describe? This probably would be a toxic romance, I would say. So Hudson Pierce is a very complicated man, and of course when our female character Lainey meets him, she doesn't know that. So in this book in particular, they're pretty short books, so that's why there's 5 books technically, but they're all relatively short. So when Lainey meets Hudson, she is bartending, she just got her MBA, she's about to take a week off for graduating with her MBA, and Hudson comes into the bar, which he's the new owner of that bar, but she doesn't know that. They have a little moment, and then he leaves, and then he comes in the week after she comes back from vacation and proposes that, they fake date because he wants to show his mom that he actually can have a successful relationship. Now, that should have been red flag number 1 for Lainey, because there's a lot that comes after that, okay? But this series like put me through the ringer with my emotions for them, because I felt everything that Lainey was feeling. Like, Laura Lynn Page did a really good job of writing to where you felt the emotions and you felt emotionally attached to them. So yeah, this first book was, I feel like you're gonna get hooked. I don't even know when this book ends. Oh, I do know. Okay. They're hard to like break up when, because I've read them so many times back to back to back. I've reread them quite a few times. This is kind of one of those books that are up there with the Crossfire series and the 50 Shades of Grey series. It's just a series that's very nostalgic to me. That was pretty early on in my like romance journey that I read that stuck out in my mind. A lot of Bethany Chris books are like that too, but this is another one that I think I've talked about in a video similar to this before, but just wanted to mention it just in case, because I know she's doing a Kickstarter. So if you want to read that book and see if that's for you, go ahead. But the next book I want to talk about is one that I haven't read in a while, and I really want to reread it, and that is A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane. This is a perfect blend of fantasy and romance, literally in the same book. Like, it is a perfect blend, and I say that literally. I just feel like all the aspects that Milla Vane wrote with this book, it just blended perfectly. There was not one thing that I hated about this book. Now, of course, with this book, the disability representation of our female character is really, really what draws me to this book, and I don't mention it all too much because it's one of those books that I feel like if I hear criticism on, I'm gonna flip the fuck out. Like, it's just one of those books I cannot hear criticism on, which a couple of my friends here on Booktube did do a video similar to that, where like these are books that like I won't hear criticism on. So let me know if you want that video, but this is one of those books for me. Just because I relate so much to Yvonne in this book. And just the struggle that she goes through. She may look very fragile and weak on the outside. And she, has something wrong with her knee. It was broken and it wasn't healed right. So she walks with a limp. She's missing a finger. She might just look very frail on the outside, but she's one of the strongest characters I've ever read in my entire life. And then Maddox recognizes that right off the bat, even though like he's this big, huge guy on the outside that can take on really anything physically. He's like, but on the inside, I'm not like you, like Yvonne. I need you kind of like to help me balance everything out. And he like she teaches him how to be a king. And it was just so good. I loved this when I read it the first time. So this is another book that is very long. It's 500 pages, but I think the third book in the series is coming out this year. So highly suggest picking these up if you want a really, really good fantasy romance, a true fantasy romance. The next two books are actually, this one can be considered a historical fiction with a romance, and that is Lovely War by Julie Berry. So when I was first here on Booktube back in 2020, at the end of 2020, this is one of my favorite books of 2020, okay? Now, this book is a historical fiction book. Like I said, it takes place during two different times, during World War I and World War II. And it tells the story of three different stories, technically. So you have a couple in World War II, a couple in World War I, but the story is told by the Greek gods. So it's Hephaestus and Aphrodite, and it's their story. But then you have these different gods, like Ares, the god of war, that comes in, and Hades, and all these different gods that come in and kind of throw their little magic on the romance story, on their story. So I sobbed during this book. There were so many things that I sobbed about during this book, and this is another one where I don't talk about because I don't want people to read it and then come to me and be like, I didn't really like it, because I feel like I'm going to personally be offended because it's one of my favorite books of all time. Like, I've tabbed this up. This is one of the first books I tabbed, like to the point where I didn't really have real tabs. I had these like crappy big tabs that like you stick out so far, but it's a book that I literally absolutely adore. But the stories that were told in this book, like between the World War I and World War II, the couples in those books, it just for some reason made me sob like a baby. It's just, I wish I had a better way of explaining what this book was. But if you've been around since like the very beginning of my channel, you've probably heard me talk about this. But I will say this is a historical fiction book, and it does have a romance in it. Okay, just want to throw that in there. I know a lot of people watch me for romance, and I absolutely love romance. I haven't read a historical fiction book in quite a while, and I'm itching to read one, but this one does have a romance. A lot of historical fiction I read is heavily, the subplot, it has a lot of romance in it. That's just because I particularly like that, but I would highly recommend if you're a romance reader that wants to try historical fiction, try this one because it was one of my favorite books of 2020, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. The last one I want to talk about is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So I am someone who, I talk about this book a lot, and this is one of those books that I would recommend to anyone, literally recommend to anyone. And the reason why I say that is because every single person who reads this book will get something completely different out of it. I literally mean that, completely different. So it's one that, how do I say this? So this is a very, very, very heavy with the mental health rep. And our female character, you see her at the beginning of the book, she commits suicide and she gets thrown into what is called the Midnight Library, which is basically I guess what people would say in between like life and death. It's where she can go through her midnight library, go through the library, open up a book. And it's a particular time in her life where it was like you could go this way or you could go that way, and she chose this way. And it's a way for her to like see if she regrets that or if she wants to like relive a moment. You know what I mean? And it was so, at the time when I read this, I started reading it, I started listening to it, and I said, nope, I can't read this right now. I'm mental health. I think it was back in 2021 when I read this book. And I was like, I can't do this right now. And I came back to it a couple weeks later. And it was one of the most inspiring books that I've read in a way that it doesn't feel inspiring like when you're reading it. You just sit back after you read it and you're like, what did I get from this book? And I actually got a lot. So it's one of those books that I think no matter what genre you read, a lot of people would get something out of it and it would all be totally different. For me, I mean, the biggest one that I took away was like, I don't want to live my life with any regrets. Like by the time I die, I don't want to have regrets. So I live my life to the fullest. If I want to do something, I do it. If I don't want to do something, I don't do it. And I don't regret that decision. I don't regret any decision I make because it's a decision that is going to pivot me in one way or the other. You know what I mean? I don't want to, die and get thrown into what my midnight library would be. And I open up a book and think, oh, what if I went this way? I don't want to have those regrets. You know what I mean? So it also has a little bit of a romance as well. She does go through some of her exes and sees like what happens if I would have stayed or what happens I would have left. So it was a very, very interesting book and one that I don't talk about all too much because I am a romance channel primarily, but it is one book that if you want something very, very different, I would highly suggest checking this out. Just know that there's that trigger warning right at the beginning of her literally committing suicide. And that's when she gets thrown into this midnight library. But I think Matt Haig wrote this book in such a beautiful way. And yeah, I understand why it is so widely popular because I loved it. So those are the books that I absolutely love. I just never talk about. You can let me know a book that you absolutely love that you don't hear people on Booktube, on Bookstagram, or anything like that talk about. I would love to know. We can chat about. Maybe I've read it, maybe I haven't, but I would love to chat about it in the comments down below. Leave me what kind of emoji? Leave me the Eiffel Tower emoji because I'm looking at Lovely War and it has the Eiffel Tower on it. Leave me the Eiffel Tower emoji if you made it this far. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are living a novel life, and I will see you in my next one. Bye, guys.